Hey, everybody. Thanks again for attending the NLP Summit. Excited to have you as part of this session. So today we'll be talking about scaling Gen AI for the enterprise. By way of introduction, so I'm Jacob Wilson. I'm a partner within our products and technology group here at PwC. I help lead our generative AI transformation efforts internally, as well as working with a lot of our large clients on their generative AI transformation as well. So excited to talk through this with you. I think it's been no doubt quite the evolution of the boring AI days, so to speak, and now kind of what we're seeing with generative AI, and that really taking an uptake in the market. And again, how we can use this as another kind of emerging capability to drive business transformation. So with that being said, I think a few things we want to dive into today. Before we go into the technical, just wanted to set some context around how do we think about scaling generative AI for the enterprise? Because before you get into the technical solution, it really all starts with the operating model. And how do you, as an organization, whether it's healthcare or other industry, get organized around your generative AI use cases and how you're going to really kind of bring these things to fruition within your organization. So, and with any kind of technology transformation, it's always a journey, right? So as part of that journey, there's kind of three different operating models that I'll give you the high points on that you can consider just as kind of dependent upon where you are in your overall Gen AI transformation journey. So, the first thing, typically when organizations are trying to get organized and figure out, how to get their arms around a new technology, very commonly you see a centralized operating model. So standing up a center of excellence or a centralized team to really kind of start to get an understanding around the new technology, to figure out the different governance that needs to go into play in terms of like on the Gen AI side for how does Gen AI impact your data governance policies, your AI governance policies. How do you need to think about which use cases are relevant for your business, and which use cases do you want to put out in production, and if those are impacting your internal enterprise applications or your commercial facing products. And so to kind of get all that thinking aligned at the center, and then also start to build out your Gen AI infrastructure from a central COE perspective, your Gen AI architectures, and really to kind of build that foundational layer before you kind of then spread it out to the other teams in the organization. So that's a pretty common approach in terms of where you start in a centralized operating model, just to get your arms around everything and get the ball moving forward. Then as you kind of get more comfortable, you've got your data governance kind of updates in place, AI governance updates in place. You understand the risk tiering frameworks around your Gen AI solutions. You've got a common Gen AI infrastructure and architecture, that you have in place, that now you can really do training and enablement of other application development teams to then really start building out, these solutions at scale across the enterprise, but all following, the frameworks and the architecture and the infrastructure that you set out through the centralized COE is kind of that starting point. So that's kind of evolution of, you started the center, you move into now a federated operating model. You still have the center in place that kind of define, the next updates to policies and things like that as regulations are coming down, but also as the technology is changing, how does that change the architecture and how you're asking your teams to develop solutions? But now you've got many more teams in terms of who actually understand and now know how to build out these Gen AI solutions. And then as you go from there, that can obviously evolve into different hybrid operating models and what makes the most sense for your business. As you kind of learn from the center, you learn from the federated teams, and really design something that's kind of really more so optimized for your organization from a hybrid perspective. So those are kind of broad strokes. So before you get into the nuts and bolts of the technology and the solution that we'll be talking about today, just kind of considerations for getting organized and getting started with the Gen AI transformation. So today, given we're talking about some more technical things here as part of the NLP Summit, wanted to give just at least kind of a high level, broad strokes on when we talk about Gen AI, what do we really mean? What are those kind of broad concepts? And then we'll go into some more details around how all this really works together and how you can think about solutions that you're creating in the healthcare domain. So if you start from the bottom up of the diagram, you think about that federated operating model that we were talking about just a moment ago, where you have a number of these application development teams building and creating these Gen AI solutions. For us, and kind of what we've done and what we're helping our clients with is, as you're building these solutions, you need to be able to contribute, build that in a common way, for which we have our plugin architecture and agent framework in which we're asking our Gen AI development teams to work within. But as they're building, creating those solutions, we're asking them to contribute to a common code repository for all these different solutions. So that way, you have visibility, in terms of the code changes throughout the entire software development lifecycle. But then also, like, as you're checking code in, you can run different things against that code to make sure you have some consistencies and guardrails in place across all the solutions that you're building for the enterprise. And so as part of this, whether you're running model validations and doing RAG evaluations through an open source framework like Ragus, or you have your own homegrown validation framework, every time that code's getting checked in and you're running, the deployment of those solutions, you can make sure that those CI/CD pipelines with that code, have those common evaluation pieces built in. Also, same thing in terms of like your responsible AI toolkits and how you're doing, validation for bias or misuse within the Gen AI solutions, and how you're really building that into like the plugins or agents that you're using internally or within your commercial products. How do you do code quality checks? And making sure too that the solutions you're building aren't going to eat away at the bank, so to speak, in terms of all the token consumption and the infrastructure costs, and make sure that you're doing things as efficiently as possible with all the consumption of the tokens and the models, and not running up tens of millions of dollars of footprint and compute spend when you're trying to do a simple Q&A task, for example. So those are things you can kind of build into that common repo layer in your CI/CD pipelines to make sure that again, you've got the right validation and accuracy kind of measures in place. You're looking at responsible use of the solutions, and also making sure you're not breaking the bank as you're deploying these out. Then kind of at that core middle infrastructure layer, so you've got your plugin code, but at the end of the day, whether you're running on Azure, you're running on AWS, you're running on GCP or OpenAI directly, or whatever your kind of backend infrastructure is, at the end of the day, you'll need to maintain session state, and how you're managing the chat sessions, or also if you have a running state associated with the whole agent framework and pipeline, and how you manage all that conversation flow and history, not only between the LLM and the human, so to speak, but also all these autonomous agents that might come into play. What is your kind of core data storage behind this? What are you using for OCR, computer vision? How are you managing your chunking and embedding? And what models are you using for the embedding? But then also, as you get into creating your knowledge repositories using Gen AI, what are the hybrid or the vector database solutions that you're using to kind of manage all that? And then how are you kind of scaling all your GPUs? So that kind of being the core infrastructure. And then these plugins are really kind of tapping in to that core infrastructure to support tasks like Q&A or document generation or report generation, or some of these other kind of common tasks that you'll be solving for with generative AI. And then we'll kind of go into this in detail next, but the agent layer is really kind of, think about it as really that more kind of autonomous layer or orchestration layer that sits on top of all these plugins and tools to solve these common tasks. So that way, if you have, like, let's say you've done a good job in the enterprise, you've got dozens, if not hundreds of plugins, that are solving different use cases across different domains in your organization. Well, now how do I get smarter about using those plugins, and how do I get smarter about interacting with the user to get feedback, to do query and disambiguation, to do intent recognition, to generate a plan around the different tools that will be required to solve that end user question? And that's really where the agent layer stacks on top. And then all of this, again, kind of at the end of the day, is API integration endpoints into your enterprise applications or your commercial products to use all this stuff end to end. So I know that's kind of a mouthful on the high level design. Obviously, we could spend days talking about this, but we only have a short time here at the NLP Summit. But now, kind of taking it down to the next level. So, as we think about, well, what do we mean, really, kind of at a more detailed level around tools and plugins and agents? This terminology is always changing in the market as the technology continues to evolve. So, what does all this mean? Obviously, at the most basic level, users coming in to try and solve a task. And is part of that, how are you kind of taking that prompt from the user to determine, we mentioned query disambiguation, intent recognition, like what is it that they're really wanting to accomplish? And then from there, you can use something like an agent framework to basically do that reasoning about the user prompt to then determine, okay, yeah, I understand you're trying to perform this Q&A task against this knowledge base, but I need a little bit more information to make sure I'm getting you, the specific results that you need. So, like, if you were to think about, a researcher working in the medical field, I could ask a general question, right? That could hit across a bunch of different knowledge corpuses. But how do I make sure I'm getting the specific information that they need related to that specific drug research or other research that they're doing? To make sure that they're getting the right information at their fingertips to solve, the problem they're faced with. So that's where that agent framework can really come into play. And if you think about all this too, like within the agent, at the end of the day, when I'm trying to generate a plan in terms of how I'm going to execute all these plugins and tools to solve that user question, I'm prompting an LLM to basically generate the plan, right? And so that requires a very specific prompt as, how am I going to generate a plan, using all these tools and things that are available to me. So there's a very specific prompting logic that you're using to kind of do that plan generation. But then also too, like, again, we know the token limits are increasing on the model, so that's getting better. But today, depending upon your budget, you might also have your own fine-tuned or pre-trained models that you're creating. At the end of the day, there's going to be token limits, and you also need to think about how you're compressing these prompts too to optimize the latency and throughput with the LLM, but then also the infrastructure costs. So compressing prompts, is still something that we need to worry about and be concerned about. But then also too, like, how do I do the validation, of like a plan that's generated by an agent, layer, for example. So again, there are specific things that you need to kind of build into there and guardrails you need to put in place to make sure even something at the first level, like with generating that plan of execution, is validated to make sure that we're not already going to get off course, where we're going through that initial plan generation with the agent and the LLM. And then again, as part of this too, like there's with chat-based interfaces, like there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of session state and conversational flow that we need to manage between the end user and the agent and the tools sitting behind the scenes. But also, as you get more sophisticated, for example, too, like if you're trying to automate certain things in clinical studies or research processes or software development life cycles, and now you have multiple agents working together who are kind of well adversed in a given domain area. For example, like I'll use something basic in the software development lifecycle. Like I'm going to have an agent as a product manager. I'm going to have an agent as an architect, an agent as a software developer, an agent as a QA resource. And so now those things are kind of working together behind the scenes to try and drive automated code, automated test case generation, and kind of feeding off each other to try and get to that best result for the end user based upon their prompt. And you could apply that to different areas of clinical research and studies, and people with different domain expertise in different areas of that, and where you might create agents to kind of start to do some further automation around how you're getting the information, but ultimately going back to the end user to review and kind of sign off on that. But all that has to be managed through the session state too, so you have all that traceability and audibility of what's happening behind the scenes before the end user reviews and kind of signs off on that output. And that gets into kind of the agent swarming that I was just mentioning tool. But at the end of the day, all these agents are kind of using these different tools or plugins behind the scenes to accomplish the overall task for the end user. So I think it's pretty amazing. Like, and also to like, With the agent frameworks today, you also see more agent frameworks coming online week over week now than you do LLMs. So this agent framework is rapidly increasing, and again, is another way to drive kind of more end-to-end automation, across different domains within healthcare, but then also other industries. But hopefully, this detail is helpful for you all in terms of like how you're thinking about how do I start with just something basic, to getting a tool or a plugin that helps with Q&A for researchers working on clinical studies or research for new drugs and products in the healthcare domain, but then also how can I use agents with tools to do end-to-end process automation and reinvention, with all the latest and greatest capabilities. So I think it's an exciting time, and hopefully a little bit more details helpful here to help you think about that journey. So the last piece I'll close with here, because we only have a few more minutes, is we talked a lot about organizational models. We talked about some of the technical underpinnings of plugins, tools, agents. At the end of the day, you need to make sure that that's aligned with the risk framework that you have within the organization. Some more organizations are more keen to move, extremely fast with an AI, and that might be from more of a back office perspective versus the commercial, product and customer facing side of the house. And so, how do you think about the risk tiering of these different solutions and the controls that you need to build into place to whether you're trying to transform the back office or you're trying to transform, the front office and the commercial products that you're bringing out to market? Because each one of those is going to have different considerations and different policies that will be put in place to help guide those solutions and how those things are getting built and rolled out. Because as we've seen in the news, a lot of people have just tried integrating a general LLM point, haven't put the right guardrails in place, and then you get all the wildfire that you see in news headlines, social media channels, and obviously no one wants to be at the top of the social feeds or on the front page of the news. And so that's where these governance frameworks really come into play, and making sure that you're thinking about this in the right way based upon the use of the technology and the risk that could open for the business. And so a lot of different things that you need to consider, again, extending the data policies, AI policies, how that feeds into the risk tiering for the solutions. But then also too, how do you continue to think about the human in the loop? Because at the end of the day, like, yes, generative AI is transforming, but we still have to apply the human lens and emotion and intelligence to these things to make sure that, again, we're getting the right the right output based upon the use case that we're trying to solve for, and the value of that either internally or externally from an organizational perspective. And at the end of the day, that still has to come back to human review and quality checks at the end of the day. So how do you build that in? And again, how does that look based upon the different risk tiering framework for the different solutions? So, just some things for you to kind of consider too, like as you go through this journey, and not only the technical aspects, the organizational aspects, but also, very importantly, all of the AI risk management and governance considerations as you go through this, to make sure that, you're doing this in a safe and secure and responsible way, and you've got those appropriate either automated validations and also kind of human validations as you go through the process and journey. So with that being said, that is, just some things for you to consider as you're kind of scaling GenAI for the enterprise. I'm Jacob Wilson, and I hope you have a great rest of your NLP Summit. Thank you. And at this point, we'll open it up for Q&A.